this is sort of your equivalent of what we called morning talk, which was in one room at a table with, the 14 of us. So, wow, what a great multitude here. So have you guys ever wondered how this school started? Like, I'm sure you may have heard about that a little bit, perhaps. Not this particular space, but the school that you are part of has a history, right? Always a history. And you may have heard also about the trip. There was this bus trip. Have you heard about the bus trip? Ah, you have. Okay. So I was on that bus trip. So I want to tell you a little bit about that because it really seems to sum up in many ways the ethos of this school, right? What it's about. And so just to kind of fill that in for you. And I know this because I wrote a little piece about this back in 2020 during the pandemic. I happened to be on sabbatical and I had a little time. I was supposed to be working on something else, but and I thought, well, let me reach out to some of those alums. And I did. And very luckily, every one of them was alive except sadly one who had died some years before. So they all had stories and memories of the bus trip and they sent them to me. So thankfully this isn't just my memories, this is the memories of others who were there. And they sent me all kinds of pictures and sketches and journals. I understand you still do sketches and journaling, right? So that's part of that ethos too. So anyway, how did this all happen? Okay, so the Warings, I'm sure you've heard of them, Philip and Jose. They had 4 children, Tamora, Nathaniel, Rokiah, and Natasha, 12 down to 4. And they were dissatisfied with the public schools. Imagine that. Because back in the 70s, Philip was a teacher at Gloucester High School, and he was so disgusted. His students didn't seem interested. They were demoralized. Now, it turns out my sister was actually there at that time. I hope he didn't have her as a student. But she said the whole school kind of blew up in a way. People started going outside, leaving school, walking out. It's too bad he didn't stay. It might have actually become a more interesting place because it was 74, but he left. He was like, no, I'm going to start my own school for my kids. And his wife, Jose, was all in because she was an artist herself. And she had gone to this lovely school in France and grown up in French colonial Africa. And she was like, I'm going to teach my children art and we're going to do writing and journaling and philosophy. So indeed they did. And they started the school in a house in Rockport, basically their house in a little building they built next door. So what was it all about? Well, it was quite controversial, as you might imagine, because just like Philip was trying to teach in a very constrained public school atmosphere that hadn't really opened up yet, like it would a little bit, by the time I went, we had open classrooms. Imagine that, like this, but not in those days. So he was like, well, I'm going to set up a school. We can have art and literature and music and, of course, French, right? And so, because Jose. And so he did. But the superintendent was like, Mr. Patey was his name, and I guess he scratched his pate, and he said, I don't like this school, this is not fitting my model of a school. And he said, where's the curriculum? Where's the schedule? What do you, and he's like, I want the children to learn on their own. I want them to be independent. I want them not to feel that they have to just follow some rote learning, which is, of course, what he had experienced at Gloucester High School. By the way, I'm a graduate also of Gloucester High School, so there you go. That happened later. So anyway, so he decided that he's going to set up the school, and eventually he and Mr. Patey came to an agreement, and he set up the school, and I became part of that. So there we were in this lovely place with animals. They had goats, they had chickens, of course. There were all kinds of animals. And of course, there was bread, and we made bread. It was all very rustic and French, and lovely. But, it wasn't enough rustic. We had to go camping, too, right? So there were a number of camping trips, which I understand you guys still do, right? Do you still do the camping trips? That sounds wonderful. Just a fantastic thing. I missed out on the first camping trip they did. But by the time I came to the school, which was when I was ripped out of the O'Malley School, and I don't know if that ever happened to you. I don't know how you guys all got here, but maybe you were once in a different school, perhaps, and you're like, oh, I don't know. I don't want to leave my school. I'm happy there, but there I was. So I discovered I was happy at this school, La Petite École as it was called then, but the same ethos I think that you all still are part of. And so there we were, and the plan was, we're sitting at morning talk, and we're discussing literature and philosophy, and it's the 70s, so we're talking about Valéry Giscard d'Estaing, who was the French prime minister, and we're listening to Moustaki, who was this North African folk singer, and we're getting all that great culture, and we're saying, we're going to go on this bus trip. We're going to take this bus, and we're actually going to go across the country. We're going to go all the way to Berkeley, where Jose and Philippe had friends. So this is going to be amazing, right? How do we do this? Where are we going to get this bus? Well, it just so happened there was a New Jersey transit bus sitting around, kind of moldering, that we bought. And then it's like, well, we can't just ride in a bus with all these seats, right? We're going to be going cross country. We're going to rip out the middle of the bus. We're going to put in, do you still have this? The cozy corner? Do you have a cozy corner here? Oh, well, just imagine, you have actually cozy corners everywhere, so I've been looking around. It was basically a soft pillow that people lay on and read, right, or sketched, or whatever they did, journaled. So that's what we had in the middle of the bus, covered with purple velvet. There were purple velvet curtains all around. There was a space in the back where you could really fall asleep. There was a little kitchen where just they could make bread, and of course there was a little table where she could type, because she had to send letters back, right? These parents were not going to see their kids for 2 months. Now, 2 months. And imagine, there were no phones. There was obviously, there were phones, right? But no, people didn't use phones like we do now. No, they really didn't. It was an expensive call. So these parents had to assume, certainly my mother assumed, she wasn't going to hear from us for months. And they were fine with that. Imagine, parents were fine with that. Except there was one parent who wasn't. So unfortunately, that young man couldn't come. But the rest of us, we all went. So it was amazing, right? So there we were going to get on this bus, and we're going to go down south. We're going to go, because of course it's winter, right? It's February. We started this February 75, just about 50 years ago. Can you imagine? So we go down to North Carolina, and we had spaghetti. We always ate things like spaghetti, peanut butter, macaroni. It was a lot of that kind of stuff, right? But we had to feed a lot of kids. We didn't have a lot of money. Do you know what the tuition was at the Waring School then? $50 a month. So even then, that wasn't a lot of money. So anyway, they didn't have a lot of fancy food. I'm sure your cafeteria is much more interesting now. I hope it is anyway. But we had a lot of starch, and we survived. It was fine. So off we go. But it was so cold in North Carolina that I know my brother's going there soon, South Carolina, right? And I hope it's not this cold. But we were up in the mountains, so probably different. Our spaghetti actually stuck to the plate. We're sitting out there in this campground. I don't know if that's happened on your camping trips, but you're like, oh, I can't even eat this stuff. It's frozen. But there it was. So we go down to Alabama. We go to Florida. Oh, then we're on the beaches. Oh, it's glorious. And then we end up in New Orleans. And that was glorious, too, because we got to get oh, by the way, I forgot to mention the bike. The bus was covered with bikes. We had all our bikes on the roof. So we took our bikes down, and we biked through New Orleans. And of course, no one was wearing any helmets because nobody did, right? So it was just a glorious, glorious time. And then Nikki, I haven't mentioned Nikki to you yet. There were 2 other adults who came on the trip, Nikki von Rosenvinge and another man called Steve Kent. They helped with the driving, right? So that Philippe didn't have to do all the driving. I don't think Jose drove the bus at all. She had other things. Of course, she was busy with writing the letters to the parents so they could find out what's going on. So anyway, we're there, and Nikki has a knife because, of course, people carried pocket knives. Maybe they still do. He was arrested. Imagine, today it's hard to imagine, right? And I imagine in New Orleans today you can probably carry a gun quite openly. But he had a knife, and he was arrested, and we had to get him out of jail. And he was there it was. But now poor fellow. He was so much fun. I mean, Nicky was the kind of guy who could figure out anything. He could figure out a problem with the bus. I should mention, by this time, the bus had already broken down at least twice. I didn't tell you that. So on the way down to North Carolina, we stopped at Annapolis to see some dear friends from when Philippe taught at the St. John's School. I don't know if you've heard of St. John's, very interesting college. They study the great books, kind of like you guys, I think, might still do here. And Philippe certainly brought that to La Petite École. So anyway, the bus was rocking and rocking, and the police stopped us, like, whoa, what's going on with the bus? Well, it needed new shocks, so there was that. And then it overheated periodically, so, we're a little worried about this bus, but we're traveling along. And now I'm going to stop my monologue for a moment because we're going to see a little video just for a few seconds to give you a sense of kind of where we are up till now. So we go through New Orleans. It's a very quick video. They brought a Super 8 movie camera with them. And when they did that, they told us, you cannot bring cameras. You have to bring your sketchbooks and your journals, but no cameras. But Jose, meanwhile, was filming. So this is a little bit of what she did. And the music is something we put on later. That was not part of the original production. So this is in Rockport, and we're playing, and you don't even need the music, really. And there's the bus, do you see? Very quick. Oh, that's me. Oh, God, don't look. And that's, yes, here's New Orleans, and we're biking. Okay, and we're in a park, and okay, and there's Jose typing. Okay, and now you can, there's the bus, and we're going, and there's Ingrid, and, okay, stop, please. So that's how quick, that's sort of what it was like. I mean, if you guys are interested, we have longer videos that you could watch, which it's kind of boring because it's like, focusing on a person sitting for a long time sketching. But if you want, I do have those, and we can share them with you. But anyway, where we are just now. Okay, so we left New Orleans. You saw us on the bike for just those few minutes, right? Those few nanoseconds. So we end up now on the bus, remember, we're going, taking the southern route, we're going to Berkeley to see not only the lovely friends of the Warings, but also to see, what was his name? Richard Feynman. He was a famous physicist. And one of our students, Paul Stahavich, had written to him directly, this little boy who's like 11 years old, he's like, I want to meet you, I want to talk to you. So we went to meet Richard Feynman. Interestingly, it didn't go very well because he sort of wanted to talk kind of at us, kind of like I'm doing now, and he didn't really want any input from the students, and Jose and Philippe kind of wanted to get involved in the conversation, and he was like not interested. He just wanted to talk anyway. So, but it was still exciting to meet him, and there it was. But before we met Mr. Feynman, Dr. Feynman, we were on our way through Texas. Okay, so we're traveling to Texas. And that bus, remember I told you the bus was already overheating and then it was a little shaky. It stopped right on this highway in a place called Crystal City, Texas. And it didn't move again for 5 weeks. Well, that's not true. It moved to a garage and we didn't see it again for 5 weeks. So we had no clue. We thought it would come back soon. So what happened? Nikki couldn't fix it. Philippe couldn't fix it. And so there we are. What are we going to do? We're stuck in Texas. Like, what now? We don't know these people. We didn't plan to stop here. Well, fortunately, the man who owned the ranch, his name was Craig Morton, which I understand is also a football player, but I'd never heard of that football player. But maybe some of you have. I don't know. Probably dead now. But Craig came out and he said, you are welcome to stay here on my ranch until your bus is fixed. Can you imagine somebody so generous, right? Just invites you. Of course, he probably had hundreds of acres, but still, right? He had his bulls and his cows and all the other stuff there. And here we were coming in and we're like, okay. So there, I don't know if you can see, but we were sort of clambering along there. And I'll show you some more videos. So what happens is this. We set up our camp. We set up the fire ring. We set up the tents. There, we are situated next to what's called a tank, also known as a pond, where we had a little boat. We could swim. We could just frolic all day long. And we did for more than a month, a totally unplanned trip. Now, you can imagine the parents. Now, the parents didn't know, of course. They had no clue. They just thought we're on the bus somewhere in, Nevada, or who knows. Eventually, the parents heard that we were in Texas for a while. And Jose, dutifully told them, and we sent lovely stories and pictures. And it was great. Because we learned, not only did we learn about all the natural areas that we were in, which are totally, imagine kids who, most of us had never been to the South, never been in sort of a desert area. And I know you guys like camping and see kind of interesting places when you go. So you imagine the flowers we'd never seen, and then wondering about whether the bulls were going to charge at us, which some of them did. So we had to learn how to deal with that. And then we're finding arrowheads because, of course, there were Native Americans in the region. And we're also meeting all these interesting other animals, like in eating them, because after all, by now we were really sick of that macaroni and the bologna sandwiches, and we were having snake. Delicious. It actually wasn't bad. So we were trying, Nikki would cook up anything for us, right? So we were just having a wonderful time of sketching. Oh, we learned how to whittle, with a knife, and we learned how to, mostly just to kind of, one thing that Marin Robinson said in the middle of all this, she said, I have a little quote here, I can see myself kind of learning how to live alone. Like, in other words, here she is with a bunch of kids, right? And Jose and Philippe and Nikki and Steve, and she's like thinking, I could actually imagine living alone. Because what Philippe and Jose did was they kind of taught us how we could be independent, right? There we were. We had to kind of make do. I mean, yes, we're all going to come together and eat dinner later, but we had to go and kind of work and help and clean and do all those things. And she said, living close to the land gives you more self-confidence. And I'm sure you felt like that too when you go to a campsite. This sense of growing responsibility was certainly something the Warings wanted to encourage. But as Philippe said at one point to Jose, like all educators, we would not know what effect we're having on these children until much later, right? So he wanted to inculcate that independence, but he realized that we were still kids and we still, needed some guidance and all that. So it was a fine balance, right? Because we had a lot of freedom. We were roaming all over that place. But then one day we woke up and the tents were like soggy and something was weird. Like they felt like a waterbed. Were we floating? Were we floating on the tank? Were we actually in the middle of the pond? Yes, because there had been a flood that night. And most of us hadn't even known we were sleeping. Some people, I think, were awake. Thankfully, Jose was awake and she rescued the typewriter and the violins and the recorders. I forgot to mention all the instruments. Of course, the music, all of it saved. Very important. Oh, yes, they had to be saved. So that was good. Her tent seemed to be spared, but the rest of us woke up in this sodden mess of sleeping bag or whatever it was that we were sleeping in. And everyone, of course, had a pet, right? Whether it was a pet snake or a pet tarantula or something. And they were in jars. Don't worry, there were holes in the top of the jars. And what's happened to my little turtle or whatever? And some of them were floating away. And it was scary. And some of the shoes were floating away. Where were the shoes? Oh no, the shoes. Some people, I don't think Paul Stahavich ever found his shoes after that. So it was kind of a mess, I will say. But it was an amazing experience. We had never been through a flood before. And we pulled ourselves together and we just marched. This was one of the wonderful things about being on a ranch. Of course, on a ranch, you might think people have pickup trucks, right? Yes. And how often do you get to ride in a pickup truck on the back without any straps, just sitting and bopping along? We got to do that, okay? So, of course, it was the 70s, and things were wild then and all that. So we all pile into the pickup truck, and we go to Craig's house. I don't know how we could handle this. These sodden people come to his house like, what do we do now? We can't stay there anymore. This camp is underwater. And so he found us another little campsite. Of course, he had a lot of land. So we moved to a new spot. We dug our latrine again and all that fun stuff. And we settled, but by then the bus was getting closer and closer to being finished. So we didn't stay so much longer. But let me show you now, if we may, the next couple of seconds of highlights of the trip, which is just the Texas part, a little bit. Now there we were, I think there's a flower, lots of interesting flowers, see? Oh, there's some bowls, right? Tells you there were bowls. That's the campfire. There's the tank. That was the flood. Okay, and we're going out, and it's very wet, as you can see. Okay, we're done. So after that, the bus was fixed, and we were now going to finish our trip, right, and go to California, finally, and go to Berkeley and enjoy the culture. So what did we do in Berkeley? We stayed with this lovely family, a whole pile of us, and this was the Berkeley scene. Unlike what we had, so we'd had nature, and now we were going to have culture. And does that sound like your school, right? Nature and culture? Yes, still is. So we had the Oakland Symphony, Tilden Park, the Theater of Man's Mime Project, a Women for Peace benefit concert, the Berkeley Chamber Orchestra, the Lenox Quartet, the Oakland Zoo, and then, of course, things like Golden Gate Park and the Muir Woods and all that good stuff, too. So it was an amazing time in Berkeley. It was fantastic, but the trip was kind of winding down at that point. And so then we were on our way back. We were seeing more parks, but it's so funny. Everybody I talked to who had been part of this trip, nobody really remembered the way back, the trip back. I mean, obviously, we must have stopped. We still had to go all the way back across the country. But what everyone remembered was the trip and the camp, right? And being stuck in that place for 5 weeks. Because I think sometimes it's almost like when you look at a painting really long, you start to see things, right, that come out. Whereas if you just kind of walk by quickly, it doesn't really stick with you. And that's what it was like being in that place in Crystal City, Texas. It really stuck with us. And we all had to kind of rely on each other. And of course, I'm not saying there wasn't conflict and fights. And of course there was. I mean, we were, kids. But it was so I don't want to paint it as all idyllic every moment. Of course, there were scary moments. Poor little Chase, who was about 8 at the time, he had to hide from a bull. It was quite scary. And Jose's like, come on, keep sketching. You're fine. Ah! So, I mean, it was a little scary sometimes. But there we made it. We got there, and we got through it. And now you can show the last little bit, which is just a few highlights of sort of our last West Coast parks. And we went to a lot of state parks. State parks, George. I know you love state parks. So that was just an amazing time. So now we're sort of moving west. As you can see, the bus is going, and people are sketching. Yeah, always sketching and drumming, and lots of good things are happening. And we're outside a lot, and we're having picnics, and we're rolling about and going to the beach whenever we can, and climbing. And now I think we're in Berkeley. Yeah, going up maybe, and more. Oh, this might be on the way back now. Oh, is that? It's over. Oh my. Okay. So. We didn't have a lot of great technology then to curate for you, but there is a little taste of it. And now I would love to take your questions. I think we still have about, 10 minutes? So that would be lovely. Please, any questions? And we can take them from anyone at all in the audience who might be. Oh, yeah, that was that, and that's the part we don't remember that well. I mean, obviously we went to some parks and things, but it wasn't so memorable. I mean, it was great, of course, but at that point also we had kind of many of us, this was kind of the end for us. We knew we weren't coming back to the school. A lot of us were going back to whatever other schools we'd been going to. So I think that was part of it too. It was kind of a little bit of bittersweetness there, I think, at the end as we were finishing the trip. Yeah, a great question though. Yeah. Oh, that's a great question. Now, how did we do school? Well, people had their books. They did read. There were always the chances to do things like, let's see now, study nature, learn about history, right? We had a man who came and told us all about the arrowheads. There were a lot of books. I can guarantee you the bus was lined with books. But was anyone really doing math? Or probably not, but we'll get back to that later. But it's a good question. It's a very good question. We were always being stimulated. You know, there's so many ways of learning, right? I'm sure you. So the idea was, I think, that we would study back in Rockport, and then we would go on this trip and take that knowledge and apply it to everything we saw. Yeah, but that's a great question. It's true.
How long were you actually gone? Because you had that.
Yes, it was like 3 months instead of 2. So it was quite a long time. Yeah, it really was. And the parents were so good about it. Nobody like helicoptered in to rescue or anything like that, like they might today, right? So no, they were pretty okay. And remember, the only thing they heard were letters from Jose. She would type up these letters and send them. So that took a while, right? And that was really their only contact. Yeah. I mean, occasionally there'd be a phone call. I remember reading something. Royce was one of our members. He played the cello so beautifully. He was like my age, and he maybe 13 at the time, and he had a wonderful call with his mother. So occasionally, I don't remember any call with our mother, because our mother never answered the phone, so it would have been impossible. She just didn't like to talk on the phone. But, we stayed in touch with letters. It was fine. Yeah, but it's a really good question.
What are the ages of the kids? You said there was an 8-year-old, and you said...
Yes, Natasha was 4. Oh, and that was scary. Natasha was only 4, and there was a time when it got very hot in Texas. Of course, it was Texas. Yes. Oh, they were. Oh, her parents were there. Yes. Oh, yes. Because the 4 of them, right? The 4 wearing children. And so because we went down into Mexico, I forgot to mention that. Of course, we're in Texas. We're going to go visit Mexico. We did that once or twice. And it was very hot. And she got heat stroke. It was very scary. But she was okay. But there were those things. But yeah, the oldest, there were like a bunch of us sort of early teenagers. Can you imagine like being willing to take a bunch of 13, 14, 12-year-olds, in a kind of a small claustrophobic bus? I mean, but there it was. We all survived. Yeah. But mostly we were in that kind of young teenage range, yeah. My favorite part, great question. I think it was the tank and swimming in that. I mean, you can imagine, I know it was only fleeting that you could see that, but we just swam all the time, and there was a tree in the middle of the pond or tank, and we would swim to that, and I called it Paradise Island, and we would row out there, and it was just so much fun because there was a bunch of kids just playing in water, right? Like, what could be better? So it was our own little, and we knew it was kind of icky underneath, probably muddy, but we didn't care. We were swimming over that, but that was really my favorite. And then there were some sunsets out there that were beautiful, as you could imagine. Just the nature, the quiet, the peace. It was really, really beautiful. I think it was. I mean, I enjoyed Berkeley and I enjoyed the other places, but yeah, that really was a special moment for sure.
Have you been back to these places since?
No, I really haven't. It's such a great question. I mean, I've been to Berkeley, but not to like that street or that house or any of those. Yeah, and certainly not to Texas. What we did do was a few years ago, we had a couple of reunions, and it was nice. We sort of had one and then another, and then we sort of stopped. You know how these things can run. But we did bring Craig Morton to one of our reunions, the man from Texas, and he came. So this was in Gloucester, and it was so great to see him, and he was so happy to see us, and yeah, so that was sort of a way of reconnecting. But no, I know sometimes this stuff just is frozen in your head, right, for years, and you think, what was it? What would it be like to go back there? Yeah, that'd be really cool. Oh, that's wonderful. Well, that makes me so happy to hear that because, that's sort of I think of the legacy of the trip for the school, and again, this is just me. You may feel totally differently and have other thoughts about it. Maybe you've never heard about the trip until today, and that's fine too. But just the sort of that adventurousness and that independence and that chance of seeing things in nature and really being just left to kind of observe and be with it, right? And I know with your sketching and your journaling, you're doing that, right? You're really focusing and observing, and it's amazing how it really sinks in, it's neat. And the French, of course, the French.